Okay, thank you, Paul, and thank you to PIttwater for inviting Brisbane down for this morning's session. Paul mentioned that we have a number of urban design programs because Brisbane is a city centre, but it actually covers a much larger metropolitan area. And what I've been asked to focus on today is the Vibrant Laneways program. Now that's Brisbane City Council's city centre initiative, and it's about enabling the fine grain economy through the transformation of spaces. Now it commenced back in 2006, and it was through the first Brisbane City Council City Centre Master Plan. And in there were a number of demonstration projects, most of them large scale, but one of those demonstration projects was the enhancement of the public realm for small spaces. And there was a number of those small spaces that were listed out there. But rather than going through a fairly traditional consultation process and just upgrading the public realm, over a period of time, there was more and more focus in terms of activation and the way in which we engaged with people. And a lot of that was through events and temporary public art installations. Bringing us around to today, over the past 18 months, Brisbane's created its next City Centre Master Plan. And the great thing is that in the new Master Plan is not only the continued renewal of the small spaces, but also the ideas around the outdoor galleries, events, event-ready spaces, lighting strategies, etc. Part of the development of that plan was the Ideas Fiesta, and some of you might have heard about this before. So it was that consultation that was held. It was actually held over a period there. I think it was 27 events over 23 days. I think Brisbane attracted about 16,500 people to those events, and it was done in a way, it was really about generating ideas and engaging right across with both development, education, the design professions, students and the general community through a series of events. And the great thing for us was we partnered with our urban renewal team on that, but it actually put a spotlight on some of the spaces that had already been transformed. But it also focused and showed people the opportunity for new spaces. And one of those key events was held in Albert Street in the city, and it closed a block of the city centre over 3 days for 3 lunchtime periods. And that event gained momentum. So people were able to actually sit in the street and actually enjoy a picnic. And then there was a consultation process going on at the same time. So since 2006, there's many projects which we've actually delivered. The first of which I'll talk about is Eagle Lane. And what you'll find with most of these projects is they don't happen overnight. So Eagle Lane, for example, started back in 2008. So in 2008, it was a small section of laneway connecting Eagle Street and Queen Street, right at the sort of city, the financial end of the city. It had 3 buildings, 2 of which completely backed onto this space, no activation whatsoever, and a third space which was an underutilised ground floor foyer into a commercial building. The first intervention was the one you can see up there on the right, which was a public art installation. So the lane was closed temporarily for a month. The installation put in place, and it became very popular over that month period, and people were using it particularly as a lunchtime spot. Now, there was a lot of focus on other spaces in the city at that time, so it didn't actually gain that capital funding to start to, go through to more of a permanent transformation. And they weren't really convinced either, in terms of the councillors, that they really wanted to permanently close a section of road. So it was 2 years later, Transport colleagues upgrading the adjacent footpath in Eagle Street used this space again as a site compound, closed that bit of lane for months. And what we used then, we took that opportunity to say, actually, how does that affect the way that traffic moves in the city? What were the complaints and feedback that council was getting at that time? And what we were able to demonstrate was, in fact, that it didn't really change the way that traffic moved in the city that much. It didn't really affect how people loaded and unloaded. So that was great for making that business case to say, can we actually think about now permanently closing this section of the lane? That was supported. Funding came through, and in the meantime, while we were actually getting ready to go through there and construct, we were able to utilise that space and start to activate it through temporary pop-up uses. And that was actually a coffee van that came in there for the 4 months in the lead up to construction. Incredibly successful. They were very disappointed when they were moved on and said it's time to actually start construction, because they sold a lot of coffee in that time. So this is what we've got today. So up at the top, the works were finished in 2013. So What we try and do is actually put into those spaces something that really creates that point of difference, because you can't create the point of difference right throughout the city because there's all of the costs associated with that and the maintenance. So we tend to use the standard pavement finish, but we put into those places small interventions, you know, bespoke furniture. And in this case here, you've actually got the first installation of what is now the beginnings of our outdoor art gallery. And the great thing about the outdoor art gallery is its light boxes installed on that wall. And what it did was it gave us the opportunity to really work very closely with the property owners of that building, because it's private land and we have to license the use of those walls to attach that infrastructure to. We're now in our third installation, which you can see at the bottom there, and there's a fourth installation due to go into those light boxes in October. But the great thing, lots of talking, lots of facilitation has gone on over the past 12 months. And in the last month, what we've actually had is a pop-up coffee bar, or a hole-in-the-wall coffee bar has opened. It trades there from 5:30 in the morning. It has a licence to use part of that space, so you've still got the public space, some of which is actually licensed. They're actually thinking of, and in fact they're investigating getting a liquor licence and then partnering with a food van in the evenings. And each of these spaces become event ready, so they actually have power and water installed in them, so you can hold small events there, or you can actually service food vans as well. There's a juice bar which is being fitted out at the moment. The hotel, which backed onto the space, is being refurbished. It's actually, when it opens again, it's actually going to have part of its frontage onto the lane, and the underutilised foyer has actually just been let for retail use. So it's an incredible transformation. It's taken 6 years, but it's still ongoing. Immediately next to that is work that we've just finished, and this is in Mooney Fountain Plaza. This was actually a small park. It was a paved park, fantastic fig tree in this location, and an old, in fairly poor condition, memorial. The space was really, it was poorly designed and it wasn't very well used. So what we've done here again is the bespoke furniture coming in beneath that tree, preserving the health of that tree, and actually creating a space which both we can license for dining, as well as then a public space around that. Just another photograph looking. The great thing here is it's one of those new city gateway points that we've marked and celebrated that tree. And the people that actually are in that ground floor there are now talking about extending their licensing and dining into the evening there. They're also talking about opening up a gelati bar that fronts out onto that space, rather than it all being internalised there. This is another example of a great partnership. Gardens Point Road was a small-scale space in the 2006 master plan. It was a service road that is at the back of the Queensland University of Technology, which is on the right-hand side. On the left is Brisbane's River Stage. Down the slope is the Goodwill Bridge, so connecting across to South Bank, and back up behind me would be the City Botanic Gardens. It's actually a key connection in the city, but it's one that really a lot of people wouldn't have used, and they were forced up through the university campus, really very poor access. QUT decided that they were actually going to regenerate this back of the campus area, and what they wanted to do was to actually create a new front door, and they wanted to front out onto this space. So they came to us and offered a partnership, and in fact they ended up funding more than half of the cost of reconstruction. So this is what that's been transformed into. So the Science and Technology Precinct is now complete. They've got some of their retail and dining which fronts out onto there. It's mostly daytime trading at the moment. They've also got some teaching spaces that open up onto there, a great shared connection that takes you up and through to their childcare, as well as the theatre, for the public into the City Botanic Gardens, and straight across through here and up into George Street, so a really key connection. Down the left-hand side there is a great breakout space that was created with a series of modular concrete furniture, again introducing some colour and detail into that space. A lot of the tables running down there are quite small. They're almost like small student desks where people gather, both the public and students. Little task lighting over the desks, and also a lit space, so it's actually a safer space for people to travel through at night, connect into the gardens or back up into the city. Some of those tabletops are tiled with chessboards as well, and it's from day one. Most of these spaces, people just inhabit them as though they've almost always been there. Burnett Lane was a very, one of the earlier projects, similar timeline to Eagle Lane, but it got its funding, capital funding, much faster. So again, on the left-hand side was that very first temporary art installation to draw people's eye into what was a lane that a lot of people in the city didn't really know about. It actually it runs parallel to Queen Street Mall, between the Queen Street Mall and Adelaide Street. And at that point in time, back in 2008, there were no properties which actually fronted on and traded on to Burnett Lane. There was it was actually a fairly large capital intervention, but there wasn't that opportunity to close the space and change the space all that much because it's an active service lane. So there was some new work done through there. You can see in the centre there was right down the lane was a public art installation which is actually embedded into street print into the asphalt, which really draws your eye from one end of the lane to the other. And there was a lot of events that were held post the opening of that to celebrate the opening and also start to bring people into that space. So evening events, closing the street or the lane for lunchtime periods and bringing people in there, and some of that activation is still ongoing. And you can see it being used for the Bris Asia Festival. The interesting thing about these spaces is Brisbane has its business hotline. And so what we're able to do is to provide details to the business hotline to say if you're coming in and you're looking to hold an event, here's some spaces in the city where you might be able to do that, and here's what you'll be required to do in terms of your road closures, your traffic management, etc. But the great thing about this lane is since 2008 and the completion of that work, there are now 6 businesses that actually front on and operate off that lane. Restaurants, cafes, so it's a day-night economy that's occurring there. There's a small galleria for artwork that's recently opened up. And the next hotel, so anybody that knows Brisbane, there's an old Lennon's hotel that fronts onto Queen Street Mall. It's actually been refurbished. It's due to open in the next month ahead of the G20 summit. And it actually will have a presence onto the Burnett Lane now, which it never had before. This has been something which is really interesting for us, and I don't remember all of the artists' names, but I do have the details if anyone needs them. The outdoor gallery is something that we really started about 2 years ago, and it's been fantastic in terms of really getting into people's mind the vibrant Laneways branding. And so we've got, I think it's 6 locations in the city now, and again in each and every case we've actually had to negotiate with the property owners to install the infrastructure on their buildings. In some cases it's in locations where we're not intending to go in and do any other major renewal works. It's really to draw people into those spaces and to start to activate them. It's promoted and it actually operates and is curated like a normal gallery space. It's promoted at event time, so open house is coming up in Brisbane in the next few weeks, and there'll be guided tours on the weekend there of the lanes and some of these spaces. Now in terms of the promotion, we actually create a catalogue each time we actually have new works rolling through, and the works change between as little as 4 months, when it's normally the light boxes, through to longer periods of time for some of the other forms of installation. So you can see the spread that we're starting to get through the city centre there. We've also crossed the river now into South Brisbane and into Fish Lane. The brochure is published online, so you can download that and find the information yourself. There's information about the artworks, the artists, the artist statement, and it's also used by Brisbane Greeters. And Brisbane Greeters are the group of volunteer guides that operate in the city centre. They can use this brochure to take you on tours, or they can design their own tours for you, or you can in fact do your own tour. And what's been interesting with the branding is that what we're finding now is, particularly over the last 8 months, we've had more and more people approaching us and asking, can they actually be part of this? So in some cases it's actually vibrant, active private lanes that are publicly accessible, who would really like to be part of this and like to be promoted and part of the circuit. And there are other areas which are sort of underutilised, and they're coming and asking for ideas and saying, you know, is being part of this a way in which we might actually start to become more active and to encourage more businesses into those spaces. So the light boxes are one way that we've been doing that, but we've also been doing it through back into Burnett Lane again. We've actually installed street lighting in there, but the street lighting is attached to the buildings and it's centrally located, so it performs the function of street lighting, but it also creates a canvas. And we've had 2 different installations go in there. Ross Manning's work, which is at the top there, and more recently work by Lincoln Austin, which is interesting because it's actually core foam, which he's then actually carved each piece so that it looks different, installed onto those pendant pieces, and then the lighting, there's actually LED lighting there so you can choose which colour you want them, and it actually carries the light in a different way. So again, it's something that takes, for that evening economy, takes people's eye down Burnett Lane. And then lastly on the right hand side there is, again on a private building, points where we can actually install large banners and display artwork. And similar to a gallery, just at the bottom there you've got the attribution stickers which actually go down and onto the pavement rather than sort of little attribution plaques that you'd get into a gallery space. And just lastly, back to Albert Street. So there's a photograph of that picnic that was held back last year as part of the Ideas Fiesta. What's happened since then is it's still promoted for use as an event space. We've had the Skateboarder X competition was held, so the street was closed. Over a weekend there was a competition held there. And more recently, again going back to Eagle Lane in a way, we closed it for 3 days, almost completely. And it was used as for a series of events for the BrisAsia Festival. But the really useful thing at that time is we were able to actually run a full traffic study. So now we can understand if we close the city, close that block of the city for that 3-day period, how does it actually affect the movement of traffic there? So again, it gives us that data to create that business case. Is this a space that the city might want to actually transform into something else in the future? So that's Vibrant Laneways.